Hello everybody, thank you for joining us and welcome to today's webinar. This session is called Built-in Performance Monitoring in Oracle and SQL Server. For those of you who have joined us for one of these discussions in the past, you'll know that this is going to be a discussion rather than a set presentation like some of the other webinars that Redgate puts on. So please be prepared for a good, lively discussion. It might not go completely to plan, but hopefully by the end of it, you'll learn quite a lot about the different types of monitoring tools within Oracle and SQL Server and how they are similar and how they are different. I do hope you had a chance to check out some of the things that I put up on the screen beforehand, and thank you as always for logging in early. So today's presenters are Jonathan Lewis and Grant Fritchey. You'll hear a little bit from Jonathan and Grant as we get started. So this session, along with a number of sessions that I put on, is brought to you by Redgate Software. In particular, the deployment suite for Oracle and the SQL Developer Bundle. If you haven't seen our tools, then you will be able to find out a lot of information about them on our website. The site is quite nice and easy, and it does divide up the tools into Oracle and SQL Server. For the Oracle people in the audience, I will be doing a demonstration of a new tool that we've got called Source Control for Oracle, which, as the title, as you may have guessed from the title, helps you with source controlling your database code. If you'd like to find out about that product and like to see a quick demonstration, then please do hang around after the main presentation. As well as producing tooling, one thing that Redgate really believes in, and we put quite a lot of effort into, is supporting the community around the technologies that we produce tooling for. So things like this webinar, and if you come to any of the Oracle webinars and one of the sort of regular program, is just part of a whole set of resources and activities that we're doing as a company to help you guys in your work. So things like the Oracle Educational webinars at redgate.com/Oracle Education, all things oracle.com, simpletalk.com, SQLServerCentral.com. I'd really recommend you check out these resources after the session. There's a huge amount of information there, and again, this is just to highlight what Redgate as a company, what we're trying to do to help you guys out. So the two main presenters for today's discussion are the two guys that will be discussing the differences and the similarities between Oracle and SQL Server monitoring. We've got Jonathan Lewis. He's a founding member of the OakTable Network and an Oracle ACE director. And on the SQL Server side, Grant Fritchey is a Microsoft SQL Server MVP. If you're on Twitter, then you can follow Grant at @gfritchey. Both Jonathan and Grant will tell you a little bit more about themselves when they come online. Oh, sorry, they are already online when they're talking. As always, I'm James Mercer. I work at Redgate Software, and I'm the creator and editor of allthingsoracle.com. If you're on Twitter, please do follow me at allthingsoracle. So before we get going with the main presentation, if you haven't realized already, everybody will be on mute for the duration of the session. Obviously, apart from Jonathan and Grant, I'll unmute them in a moment. If at any time you can't hear us, please do let me know. The sound might not be that good at sometimes, but please do let us know. Obviously, check your speakers and your audio settings first. Please do type your questions in the questions box in the control panel. One thing that's slightly different about these discussions compared to the other webinars, and something that we found from the last session, if you can type questions in as we go along, we're going to give a little bit of time for Grant and Jonathan to check the questions box and see if there's anything that they haven't covered or something that they may be able to elaborate on a little bit as they go into the next bit that they're talking about. So we really want to try and keep this as a nice free-flowing conversation. So there won't be a Q&A, a traditional Q&A at the end of the session, but please feel free to ask questions as we go along, and hopefully Jonathan and Grant can answer them. If they can't, then I will be putting a recording of this session up afterwards at redgate.com and also allthingsoracle.com, so feel free to ask further questions at allthingsoracle.com, and hopefully Jonathan and Grant can advise you and help you out afterwards. One question that's just come in actually already. Everybody will be notified of when the recording is available, so I will send you an email as soon as I get that up online. Hopefully I can get it up in a couple of days. Certainly it'll be up early next week. Okay, so on to the main discussion. Once again, this is a live discussion. There will be a couple of slides, so both Jonathan and Grant have some slides that will sort of help with their conversation, but this isn't a traditional presentation. This is more of a discussion, and I hope you will enjoy it as much as I'm really looking forward to this. And I would just like to welcome Grant and Jonathan.
Thanks.
Thank you, James.
I think it would probably be a good idea for the people that haven't come to one of the sessions before, if you could just quickly introduce yourselves, and then we can get going with the main presentation or the discussion.
Oh, you're first on the slide, Jonathan. Go for it.
Oh, I was about to say, well, after you, Grant, because we decided we'd let you speak first. Okay, well, my name's Jonathan Lewis. I've been in IT for a very long time now, but I can say that I'm just coming up to a quarter of a century of using the Oracle software, although I've never actually been employed directly by Oracle Corporation. Although you've probably seen, or many of you will have seen, the fact that I do seminars about Oracle for Oracle University under their Celebrity Seminar Series. So 25 years, 3 books I've written, 3 I've contributed to, quite a lot of experience with Oracle. That should be enough, I think, from me. I'll hand over to you, Grant, so you can see all of it.
Sure. Well, Grant Fritchey, Microsoft MVP on SQL Server. I've been in the business for, oh my gosh, almost 25 years too, although I've only been working with SQL Server for about the last 18 or so. Let's see, I've gotten several books, including one on query performance tuning, so that's very much applicable to today's topics. And I don't know, that's it. I blog at scarydba.com, and I look forward to seeing people at various conferences. I'll be at TechEd this year. I haven't announced it yet, but it looks like I'm going to be speaking at PASS, and that's and SQL City in London with the Redgate crew. So let's get going. Let's go to the first slide, which would be dynamic management objects. There we go. All right, so what we're talking about today is the various built-in tools that are available with Oracle and SQL Server, comparing, contrasting, all that fun stuff. And the one I'm going to start with is my favorite tool since SQL Server 2005, and that's the dynamic management objects. And all they are is a series of system views that get you into various things. Now, the ones I have listed here are 5 of the more interesting ones for queries, but there's a whole slew of different system views about queries, query tuning, SysDM OS performance counters, so you can look at the operating system performance counters, information about indexes, all kinds of different things. But mainly, since we're talking performance, I've focused down on the query DMOs. And so going down the list, what you've got is DM exec requests, which shows you currently occurring queries. You get DM exec query stats, which shows you, and procedure stats, which both show you an aggregation of queries currently in cache, how many times they've been called, how frequently, how long they've run on average, what the longest runtime is, how much CPU they've used, blah, blah, blah. All kinds of cool stuff. And then SysDM exec SQL text, which shows you the actual query statements for either the requests or those query stats, and then the ability to pull the plan straight out of cache and look at the execution plan. Basically, in a nutshell, this is one of my favorite places to go to get information because it's so immediate, it's so customizable, and I can pull together exactly what I need, exactly when I need it, very quickly by knowing how to combine these various system views. And it's just one of my favorite places to get information. And that's pretty much all I want to say for the moment. I'm interested in hearing if Oracle's got something similar.
Yeah, well, just looking at the list you've got there, I can certainly line up. I mean, the first thing to say is that you're talking about dynamic management objects. The jargon phrase you'd use with Oracle is probably the dynamic performance views. And of course we do have similar sorts of things there. Whereas I can see you've got everything with the DM underscore in front of it. The Oracle equivalent, people tend to talk about, if they don't say dynamic performance views, the V dollars and the X dollars. The V dollars being the ones you're supposed to be able to query, the X dollars being the things which are actually hidden behind the views. We actually have the sort of exposed internal C structures or indirect calls to procedures and all the rest of it, so that's C code, that Oracle pretends or presents as if they were table type objects. Those are the X dollars, but in fact then quite literally on top of that Oracle sits in a number of views where you get something which says, let's say we'll take $v SQL plan, which corresponds, I would say, probably to your DM exec query plan. There is actually a $v SQL plan which essentially says select this set of columns from $x KGL child cursor or something of that sort. And historically, the X dollars had incomprehensible names for the tables and columns, and the V dollars were basically used to make them look a little nicer, look a little more readable and comprehensible. I just noticed the question. Yeah, I noticed the question that does Jonathan have slides showing the views? Well, I didn't actually know in advance exactly what you were going to be showing and saying, so I haven't got exactly matching views. Okay, so yeah, but yes, we have got those. I mean, obviously there are differences. And we have SQL text, just like you have. We have V SQL plan, just as you have query plan. We have V SQL, V SQL stats, and various different breakdowns in that sort of area. But looking at it, it looks as if you actually have two views, one which is just about SQL, one which is about procedures. As far as we're concerned, everything is a cursor. So in fact, procedure calls are essentially going to appear as well inside the one view, which is v.sql. And I suspect the exec requests doesn't have an exact correspondence. Again, it's sort of embedded within v.sql.
Right.
Different ways of breaking things down there. Well, so yeah, we have lots of similars as far as the statements are concerned.
Cool. Well, the procedure stats is actually a construct on top of query stats. It's just an additional way to look at it, a more simplified way. If you've got stored procedures or parameterized queries, it will group them together, whereas that same query will be in the query stats as well. So it's just it's a convenience thing, but I like showing it because it is convenient.
Well, certainly it would be quite nice if Oracle had something similar. I know that when we run up some of the sort of snapshot type reports that you can get from this stuff, Oracle gives you various tools to do that. One of the features is that you get a report which is the SQL executed in the last hour sorted by number of physical reads or number of buffer visits, amount of CPU and so forth. And of course, with that report, what we see is double counting. So if you have a procedure which is very expensive because it called 4 SQL statements which were very expensive, we see 5 things of which the procedure is massively expensive and the 4 SQL statements are also appearing there at the same time. And you have to guess that the procedure is expensive because of those 4 statements. It would be rather nice if there was a way of isolating this and saying, well, there was a way of breaking down and reporting something which said, from these 4 statements, take out the costs which were for procedure A, take out the costs which are procedure B, and so forth, and somehow allowed you to tie things together a little more conveniently in packages like that. But unfortunately, we don't have that.
Huh, interesting. Well, it's funny because you mentioned, go to the very next slide, James. Server dashboard. Cool. I put this in because the interesting point here is that this is like a GUI interface within SQL Server Management Studio, but it's actually simply a series of queries against the DMOs. So it's not showing you anything that you can't get at yourself. It's just put it together in a fancy fashion. So you'll notice it shows the number of active sessions and the amount of CPU used and logical I/O used, but that's all just pulled together from the SysDM exec requests. So you could just do the exact same thing yourself. It's funny that they've got it set up that way. You know, SQL Server. SQL Server's famous for helping us, right? Making it easy for us to get things done, as opposed to showing us how to get things done. But I always like to go to the how rather than the pretty pictures.
Right. Well, yes. I mean, as you might expect, Oracle has got a similar sort of approach as well. The Oracle Enterprise Manager. James, could you go to my second slide, please? Yeah. We have both Enterprise Manager and a sort of super duper Enterprise Manager, which is called Grid Control, which is why the slide here is called Grid, Grid Top Activity. Some of the dynamic performance stuff actually that you get with Oracle you have to pay for, and there is this this amazingly detailed construct there, the dynamic performance view, which is known as the active session history, or $, active session history. I mean, basically, Oracle has a lot of code inside it which maintains all sorts of counters and timers. So at any instant, any piece of code that is running is producing a record of exactly what it is doing at that instant, how many times it has done it, and all the rest of it. And as you've shown the views which are about SQL, well, we have views where SQL statements are accumulating the work information about the work they do, the number of times they visited the buffer, the number of disk reads, the amount of CPU time, the amount of time spent waiting for a lock to be acquired, things like this. Right. At the same time, you've got things like any access to a file, there's a resource which is the file, which is counting the number of times it's been accessed and the average time it took to do an access and the size of the accesses. You have things like locks, how many times a transaction lock's been acquired, how long it took each time, how often you actually had to wait for it. Rather, you know, there's loads of ways of doing this, and basically from 3 dimensions, you get counts of what resources are doing and how they're being used, resources like files and so forth, and locks. You get accumulation of information about what SQL is doing, and you get information accumulated about what each session is doing. Right? So there's each session has the $, session statistics. There's something right now about 1,000 different statistics. You know, how many buffers has this session visited? How many times has it started or committed a transaction, and so on. Right. There's several hundred wait events that a session may wait for. You know, I waited to acquire a table lock. I waited to read a block from disk, and so forth. So we've got these 3 dimensions. There's what a session has done and how much time it's spent waiting and CPU working. There's information about resources as a second dimension, and information about SQL as a third dimension. But apart from all this, on top of it, there's simply this thing called $, active session history, which just says, once a second, I'm going to see exactly what is happening on the system and record it. And so you get a row which says, in this instant, at this 1 second, this session was doing this SQL statement, this line of execution plan, doing this physical disk read, waiting at that time for a disk to respond, and so on and so forth. And you get something like, oh, I don't know, 186 columns of information about that 1 instant for that 1 session. Right? Now that view you have to pay for. You don't get that one free, and it's very expensive, right? But I mean, there are loads of other views that you don't have to pay for, and you can see loads of these through OEM and so forth, as a graphic image of what's going on. The screen I had to show here is Oracle's presentation of this active session history, and you can either get a picture like this, which well, it says up the top right there, this historical one. You know, this happens to be every half hour for the last 24 hours. It's a summary of the stuff that's been captured. and there's a section about the SQL that's been going on, there's a section about the sessions and so forth. So we've got this wonderful graphic thing which says, if you want to see where the time went, this is what the database has been doing. And this is the 24-hour shot, but there's also the 1 hour, what's been going on in the last hour. And as you can see, we've got all this sort of green stuff which represents CPU, we've got all this blue stuff which represents I/O, and we can just go up and say, well, let's highlight that big blue spike there and see what was going on in that little 5-minute or that 30-minute slot, which SQL statements or which users were doing most work.
Right.
So, as with your SQL thing, it's we get similar sort of approach.
Well, that's funny, because if you go to my third slide, James, the picture's not going to be as pretty because I didn't actually capture data sets. Hang on one second. There we go. It's actually very similar. There's an added function that you have to set up and build and put into SQL Server. I believe it's not extra, but it might be enterprise. I was looking up to see if I could find that information. But it's actually really similar to what you've got. It collects queries over time. It collects the performance metrics on the server itself over time, and it has all the stuff available for you in what's called the management data warehouse. It's the data collector is the main thing collecting the information, and then it puts it all into a database called the management data warehouse, and that gives you this whole historical ability to look at over time. Well, gosh, look at this. I was getting very high CPU. Which queries were being called? Or this query was taking a long time. I wonder if it used CPU or disk. And you can keep drilling down on stuff like that. And it sounds almost exactly the same. I'm sure the level of granularity is not the same, but it's pretty similar. And this is all built in, but you have to turn it on. You have to set it up. You have to maintain it. And it's all completely separate, whereas the DMOs are done completely automatically for you. This is something else that you, as the DBA, data architect, whatever, has to get your hands dirty and dive into. And again, I just showed a very simple view of it without much data on display.
Right. Well, interestingly, I think you've just answered 2 questions which I can see up on the screen here. Do we have Oracle's AWR equivalent in SQL Server? It looks like your data collector is the equivalent of, well, the active session history and all that information and all the free stuff as well gets captured as a historical version in what Oracle calls the automatic workload repository. And yes, there's also the second question here. Says Jonathan mentioned the ability to see the top activity for the intervals in the past. Does SQL Server have anything like that? It sounds like your data collector. So
right.
we are overlapping. And interestingly, as you say, your data collector is something the DBA has to get their hands into, has to set it up, and all the rest of it. With Oracle 10. And Oracle 10 and Enterprise Edition, we got the automatic workload repository and all this ASH active session history stuff, which you install the database, everything is automatically alive and it's all happening automatically, whether you ask for it or not. You actually have to go to some steps to switch it all off. But historically, right back to, I think it was Oracle 7, and even before Oracle 7 there was a simpler version of it. We had this thing called Statspack, which was basically...
I remember that.
Sorry?
I said, I remember that.
Yeah, Statspack. It's still around, and it's free of charge. And essentially, Statspack is the AWR minus the active session history, the very, very detailed, very expensive one. But essentially, Statspack is a set of routines, procedures, and reports and so forth, which the DBA can set up with just a little manual intervention to say, take a snapshot of all these dynamic performance views, and typically people do this every hour, but some might do 30 minutes, 20 minutes, even 15 minutes, so they get effectively a very large fraction of the AWR free of charge, even in the very latest versions of Oracle, and of course it's invaluable in the standard edition, the sort of cheaper license versions of Oracle. But it's remarkably close to the data collector concept. But if you want graphic support for Statspack, I think you probably have to go out and get some freeware or or some of the budget tools which are available from other sources.
Right. Well, and then depending on what you want out of the data collector, you can actually program it to do its own stuff. It comes with a basic set of performance diagnostics, mainly focused on queries. By the way, one of the questions was, does it capture the top number of statements or all of them? And it pretty much captures all of them. It has to, in order to be able to supply you with top 10 by CPU or top 10 by I/O or top 10 by whatever. So it's the interesting thing about setting this up is that you are looking at data management issues that you will have to worry about if you've got 10, 20, 100 servers. This thing could be, your biggest server in a heartbeat.
Right.
So you're going to have to keep a real close eye on it.
The Statspack equivalent, it just tends to be one little application running within one database, so it's all very much focused, or technically one. It is one database. It captures all the instances, but you don't tend to have a data collector which is talking to lots of different databases.
Well, yeah, and that's the other thing is that it does actually require an agent that gets installed on any given server to feed back to this management data warehouse. And that, depending on the kind of monitoring you do, depending on your system setups, that agent could be a problem for people. So it's worth mentioning. But it is a built-in to SQL Server agent. It's not like you have to pay extra for it or anything.
Yeah. Well, the Statspack stuff is just basically a stored procedure which runs. You set it up with the sort of automatic job running, and the stored procedure runs typically every hour, and it just reads the dynamic performance views and writes the latest figures, so a subset of the latest figures into a few tables, and then of course it gives you some reports. There are some standard reports. There's 4 or 5 standard reports. Where you can actually say, well, what happened between 12 o'clock and 1 o'clock today? In fact, James, if you go to my first slide, do we have a James online?
Yeah,
still?
there he is. Okay, cool.
Oh, right, yes, yeah, okay.
Sorry, Jonathan.
To a very large degree. Yeah.
I was just saying, for some reason, there is a slight delay from when I actually click the slide to it showing up on the screen.
We know you were snoozing, James. It's okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. We're obviously not exciting enough. Yeah. I mean, I've just chopped out, really, when it comes to the Statspack and AWR, you can run off a standard report, 4 or 5 of them. There's a sort of fairly standard procedure for getting a headline view of the workload of the database or the instance, right? Statspack and the AWR are really pretty much not about optimizing particular statements or particular tasks or particular processes. It's about getting a headline view of how busy is the database. Am I likely to see a performance problem because something else is going on somewhere else in the database which has nothing to do with me, but it's soaking up resources. So right. it's really an overview of resources, and very, very often having sort of just checked how many CPUs has the machine got, how much memory, how much is allocated for Oracle and so forth, what you tend to do is look at the 2 headline figures, which are basically how much work is this database doing, how much time is this database spending in different aspects of the work. And Statspack gives you these 2 sections, which are referred to commonly as the load profile, which is the top half of the screen here. It's varied in presentation and content over the years, and the what people tend to call the top 5, the top 5 timed foreground events. So you can actually see, apart from the CPU time there, which is the 3rd in my event list down there, number of CPU seconds, you can actually see where processes accumulated across the database for the whole hour are spending most of their time waiting.
Right.
So this particular database does seem to be a little bit busy. I mean, if you just took a first glance at this, you might run your eye down the list and say, well, we're reporting 6,655 physical reads per second in the load profile. So we've actually acquired that many Oracle blocks from disk per second on average over the last hour, and that kind of looks a bit busy. And we've got 5,500 end user calls, like a parse call or an exec call or a fetch call per second over the hour. And looking down at the event, where is our time disappearing to? Well, of course, you look at something like the CPU time. In an hour, we've used 29,000 seconds of CPU. But of course, that doesn't mean anything because I haven't told you how many CPUs I've got on my machine. So if I've got something like, it'd be about 8 CPUs, that'd be something like, 100% flat-out CPU disappeared. On the other hand, if I've got 128 CPUs, who cares about 29,000 seconds in an hour, because 128 CPUs is, what, 500,000 CPU seconds, and this machine is idle. Right? So you always have to look at these. You get a good headline if you know what your machine is, what your instance is about, and you can spot the anomalies, you can spot the big workloads. And over time, these things have evolved. And so, of course, this is where you look as the first glance, and then there's a huge amount, and this is what, one slide on the PowerPoint, and your typical report runs to about 20 or 30 pages. This just gives you a clue as to where do I look next, what sort of problem am I looking for.
Right. It's not too dissimilar to the DMO we have called the SysDM OS weight stats, which is a cumulative weight statistics on your server, showing you exactly how much CPU, how much I/O, which weight of which type is using. The only issue with it is cumulative. So to understand it, what you've got to do is run once every 15 minutes, once an hour, but to be able to compare two values. Well, over the last 15 minutes, I'm seeing a lot of CX packet weights or whatever, indicating the possibility of a parallelism problem or at least showing parallelism. All that kind of stuff. So I mean, it's not. It's kind of funny how similar the two are. While the terminologies are very different, the approaches are very similar in what they're doing. It's always a shock when we have these chats because I always figured it would be so completely different.
That's interesting because I've always assumed they all probably ought to be pretty much the same, but just cosmetically a bit different. Because heck, it's just a relational database, or trying to be a relational database. So I mean, your comment about cumulative, of course, underneath it, almost all of these $V things are cumulative. It's simply that Statspack has this procedure which says every hour take a snapshot, and when you run the reports, all you say is subtract one snapshot from the other snapshot. Right. That's how you get your differences, right? Which I'm guessing is exactly the sort of thing you would code up with the data collector, or with your DMOs. You would write your own bit of code which stripped something out of a DMO, stored it, and then ran from there.
Pretty much.
There's nothing truly rocket science about what goes on with Statspack. And apart from some very, very clever internal stuff, the same is almost true about AWR. Yeah. couple of clever little details in the middle of it, but yeah.
Hey James, go to my fourth slide. Dun, dun. There it is. Cool. Really quickly on this, because I don't want to talk about this. I want to talk about the fifth slide, and then we'll only talk about the fifth slide. But SQL Server has this thing called trace, which is the ability to look at events as they're occurring. I've got a basic setup here showing RPC complete, which is remote procedure call, SP statement completed, which is stored procedure statement completed, and SQL batch completed, which is any kind of batch statements, which are separate from procedure calls. This is the old school way of doing it. It's actually for a huge number of reasons you do not want to use this, but this is what most people know. What I'm showing you is it's called trace, but the GUI application is called Profiler. But James, go to the next slide, because we're not going to talk about trace. Trace is horrible. This is what you want to use. This is called extended events. Now, this is the exact same type of thing, and it's basically any sort of event that occurs within the system. There's 400 or 500 different events. I forget the exact number. But all the different events, you can capture them as they occur, and the main ones we're talking about for performance would be the ability to capture page splits, the ability to capture stats updates, the ability to capture queries as they're being called, and all that sort of thing. This is where you go to capture all that information, and so this is very it's a GUI, yes, but it spits out the very simple T-SQL statements that allow you to set these things up. They filter at a very low level on the system, and it's a great way to capture metrics about what is occurring within the system. And I just can't emphasize enough, if you are troubleshooting performance problems, yes, you can look at wait stats, yes, you can look at the cache, and yes, pulling out stuff from DMOs and from the GUI is going to be helpful to you, but to really understand what's happening in the system, you're going to have to go here and set up an extended event session to begin capturing detailed information about what's occurring, so you can make the big changes. And I'm assuming Oracle's got something really similar.
Well, I was just wondering, does this somehow record every single event as it happens, with or the ones you've specified, with a timestamp and an owner and things like this?
Yes.
Or is this just switching on something which accumulates the number of times an event has occurred?
No, it captures every event. Depending on how you set it up, depending on how you filter it, it captures every event.
Right. Well, there's certainly a similar sort of thing in Oracle, which I suppose is well known as the 10046 event, but otherwise the SQL trace event, or these things keep changing. There's the DBMS monitor package is the approved mechanism for enabling this now, but historically, if you wanted to check or identify the key components of a performance problem for a particular job, for a particular task, for a particular session, you could enable tracing. And typically this was SQL trace that it was referred to as tracing. And every operation, every call made by the session would be recorded in a file. Every time that the session had to wait for some event, every event it had to wait for, it would be recorded in a file. And then you could, and along with everything else, I mean, you've got the SQL, there would be one of the calls would be a parse call, there'd be execute, there'd be fetches and so forth. And you could switch on the feature which also said every time you execute a statement, capture the actual values of any bind variables passed in and things like this. So you could follow the entire action of a session as it ran.
Yeah, it's pretty much the same way here. You can literally track through everything a session did. There were a couple of questions. Where does it save the extended events? The results go to where you tell it to go. It can go straight just to a buffer, into a memory buffer. You can go out to a file. You can go to a database. You can go to a whole bunch of, I mean, there's a couple of other places. Most people either go directly to ring buffers where they've got some kind of application that pulls it from there, or they go to a file and then deal with it later. And then is the information generated in the events which are predefined in SQL Server. Yeah, the events are predefined. It's not like the old trace events where you had to say, okay, well, here's the event. Now I want column 1, column 2, but I don't want column 3. In this case, the events are predefined and you get everything. Now it does have another thing called, actions, which are global things that come in, but they're a little bit different, and we're not, I don't want to get into a detailed discussion of extended events at this point, but I did want to answer those two general questions.
Yeah. Now, something you said did make me wonder if, in fact, your extended events captures more than Oracle does, because with the trace that you switch on with Oracle, really what you're tracing is just the wait events. So we don't record in the trace file things like I acquired a latch, I released a latch, things which don't cause Oracle to say I have to go into a wait state until a resource becomes available, basically. So we do not see quite how much work we have done and exactly what the nature of work is. We'll get a measure of the CPU that we've used. We get a measure of the buffers that we have visited, right? But we don't actually see anything about non-latched acquisition of data from buffers. We don't see what we've done with a buffer when we've got it. We don't see anything about how many times we acquired locks and released locks, unless we actually had to wait because someone else was blocking us. Right? So what we see in the trace file is basically CPU, volume of data visited, and then anything which in principle you might describe as a time loss, somewhere where you lost time because you had to wait for some other event to get out of the way.
Right. Well, I mean, just because you mentioned latch, I went and did a quick look, and we've got 5 latch events: latch demoted, latch promoted, latch suspend begin, latch suspend end, and latch suspend warning. And they pretty much do what you would expect them to do. I mean, like the suspend begin occurs when an executing task must suspend while waiting for a latch to become available. And so you can literally see all of these things occur across the system, and it does capture enough information so you could almost debug SQL Server through the events to a degree. I mean, don't get me wrong, you're not really running a debugger, but you can get pretty crazy with looking at the memory addresses and all that kind of stuff as it occurs.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just picking up on that latch thing. If a session had to suspend because it could not acquire a latch, we would see the thing which said,
right,
I waited for this particular latch. I tried to get it, I failed, I went to sleep waiting for this latch. So we do see information about latches and all sorts of other things, but only if we actually had to wait before we could acquire the resource. And so we're not completely in the dark about what we're doing, but we only see what we're doing if we're having a problem doing it.
Right. Oh, there was another question about the X events. The UI is SQL Server 2012. These are available in 2008 and above, but the UI is 2012 only, just so you know.
Yeah.
Mr. Blake something or other right there.
Yeah. Actually, I see someone has thrown in also a little bit about how the tracing type stuff got enhanced, particularly in Oracle 11. And historically, you just used to say, we will switch on tracing for a session, and then after a while, we'll switch it off. But the tracing that you can do in Oracle 11, or rather, the syntax that's become available so that almost anyone can do it, is much simpler.
Cool.
And you can switch on tracing for all sorts of different type of events, for all sorts of different types of duration and so forth. So you can quite literally say, anytime anyone runs this particular SQL statement, I want the thing traced. I want to see this statement across everybody.
Right.
Or every time this particular PL SQL module is executing and this particular statement is run. Or every time this particular statement is optimized, I want to see what's the optimized. There's all sorts of different things now where stuff that used to be, well, you could actually get some of it in rather bizarre, strange ways if you knew. But lots of the stuff which was quite difficult to discover because you weren't supposed to know it can now be switched on relatively easily, so you can see the work that Oracle is going through. But obviously, generally, you don't do that on a production system because you're introducing a huge volume of overhead in some of the cases to tasks which are supposed to be very, very quick tasks.
Well, that's the interesting thing is that and the main reason I absolutely emphasize extended events over trace is that the extended events, I mean, yes, you can just turn on enough extended events, you bring the server to its knees. But in general, if you target a particular database, target a particular session, put in the appropriate filtering, extended events is practically free within SQL Server. And so it does allow you to get onto a production system and turn on profiling in such a way that you can capture pretty much all the kinds of stuff that you just described really well. And it does work so much better than Profiler. I can't begin to tell you how much I hate Profiler and trace events because they're so fat, they're so invasive, and extended events are just so much better. It's just head and shoulders above what we used to have in terms of our ability to capture information, at a really low level. I mean, it's to be able to watch the latches go on and off within the process as it occurs is just amazing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Just going back on one thing there, the business of what's been going on in the last hour. You said that the DMOs are cumulative, and I pointed out that Statspack actually works with things that are cumulative but takes snapshots so that you can report on deltas differences. there is something in Oracle. It's relatively new. It's the various metric views, and perhaps a bit like the extended events. It's not yet hugely well known and hugely popularly used. But there are a number of dynamic performance views where Oracle internally does keep deltas. It does keep period type statistics. So we have a thing, for example, like $v file metric and $v file metric history. And $v file metric is something along the lines of, in fact, they're so not well used that I struggle to remember the details myself. So I'll wave my hands a little bit here and say $v file metric is the sort of thing which says, here's the cumulative metrics for each file over the last 5 minutes. Or it might be 10 minutes or it might be 1 hour. And then there's $v file metric history, which says I've got 7 sets of data in relating to file metrics, and the first set of data is what's happened in the current 15 minutes, the next set is what happened in the previous 15 minutes, and you get these sort of 15-minute snapshots. And there's oh, I forget how many, there's 15, 20 sets of these $v metric structures which accumulate, and it's sort of intervals of, say, 5 minutes or 60 minutes or 60 seconds. I mean, it's different interval sizes of different metrics to give you an idea of what's been happening recently. So if someone actually does come up to you and say, well, the system just sort of seemed to slow down about half an hour ago, you might be able to go to something like file metrics and say, oh yes, you know, at about 30 minutes ago, I can see here in the $v file metrics the number of I/O requests just jumped up by a factor of 10, and they were all taking 3 times as long as usual. And
oh, that's great.
If I go over to some session metrics, I can line that up with something which says there's a session here which has started doing a huge number of physical table scans, hammering the system absolutely to death. And you know, so there's this, as I say, very few people use it. There is a graphic interface to it, and Oracle has a sort of automatic interface to it, where you can sort of set it up to say things like, if a particular set of metrics right now is working at a rate which is outside the 99th percentile of what it normally works at, then raise an alert to me straight away. So you can actually get the sort of OEM set up, so sort of busy paging you, because what's happening with your files right now doesn't look the way the files normally happen and have been behaving over the last hour or so. So
right.
It's an interesting sort of games you can play, but not terribly well known at present, and probably not hugely used. But
yeah, I don't think we've got anything. I don't think we've got anything built in that's really equivalent to that. That's kind of fun.
Yeah. Yeah. I bet you someone's programmed it up by hand somewhere out in the world.
Oh yeah. There's third-party monitoring tools. I know of at least one that could do exactly what you're describing really well. I won't mention it, but there is one out there that does that.
Yeah. I have to say, there's one thing which I'd really like to show off, because
sure.
Again, I'm afraid it's a paid option as far as Oracle is concerned, but it is so tremendously convenient. James, could you go to my 3rd slide? Okay, so I showed you the slide which was the top session slide, the top activity slide with the sort of green and blue spikes, and the fact that you could spot a spike and you could click down to a little bar which said this statement is responsible for lots of your I/O and stuff like this. One of the things which came in with 11G is that Oracle will automatically start monitoring the actual detailed work done by an SQL statement if either the statement is going to run with parallel execution, or Oracle thinks it's going to take more than, I think it's 6 seconds to complete, or of course if it just does start taking too long to complete, or if you deliberately said to Oracle, whenever the statement runs, I want it monitored. Now what I've shown up here is the SQL monitoring screen, and this is just a screen, we've got a scroll bar on it, so it's just the first few statements. This is a screen of statements in the last hour which have been monitored for some reason or another. And you can see, if you look over at the very left-hand column, 3 of my sort of bar graphs there show the sort of little green rings beside them at the left. Those statements are actually currently running. The ones with the blue ticks by them are statements which have completed. The colored bar graphs you see are a measure of the time spent in the database. That's the blues and greens, which is I/O time and CPU time. I got that wrong, didn't I? The blue is database time. I'm trying to think why it's blue and green at that point. The I/O, the volume of I/O is the orange and browny colored bars there. So you can actually see the statements which are taking time. You can see also, by the way, there's a column in there about the 4th one in, 5th one, which highlights statements which have executed in parallel execution statements with the degree of parallelism, right? Now, this is really quite nice in terms of spotting the killer statements. If you could roll forward, James, onto the next slide, you can pick one of these statements, right, and you'll be shown the execution plan for that statement. And this is actually a statement which is currently running, and every 10 seconds this execution plan will refresh itself. And what you can see on the far left-hand side there is the green arrows which are saying these are the lines of the execution statement which are currently running. Right? You can see there's a load of hash joins there and a little bit of an index range scan. Yeah, those are the lines that are running. You move over to the right-hand side, towards the middle actually, you can see the blue bars which are the timeline of this particular statement so far. Now, if you look at there's 2 very long blue bars, then there's a little blip, and then there's another 4 long blue bars. When you look at that, you can say, right, well, this plan started with a full table scan where that little blip is, and that lasted, perhaps a half a second to generate some data, and then we started accessing the data for the second table in the hash join, and there's been this great long period of access for that second table, the great long period of the hash join, or the hash anti-join actually, which is going on above it. And what we can see here also is that slightly to the left of the blue bars, you can see there's it's the estimated volume of data that's going to come out from a particular line of the execution plan. And then to the right of the blue bars, second column to the right, you can see the actual volume of data that has been acquired by each of those lines. And then first column to the right of the blue bars, you can see the number of times that each line of the execution plan has actually been operated. And so with a picture like this, you can see at any time, where did I do most of the work? What's the difference between the optimizer's prediction of what would happen and what is currently actually happening, and does this explain why this query is taking much longer than I expected?
That's pretty cool.
It's fantastically cool, right? And as far as I'm concerned, almost all the problems that you get with Oracle databases can be fixed. You have to pay the licenses. This is the expensive bit, of course. You have to pay the licenses. But if you've got that activity screen showing you the spikes in the various wait events, the active sessions, right, and you can just say, well, there's a spike, that's interesting. Let's click on that, find the SQL statements, then come over to this monitoring screen. What's wrong with this statement? And a huge amount of the sort of ongoing day-to-day performance problems of the database can just be whittled away. And basically, right. I've said to lots of my clients, get a 42-inch television screen, hang it off the wall in front of your DBAs, and just put up the active sessions on this thing. Because anytime anyone happens to walk past, they might spot a big blue spike and say, oh, when I get back from my coffee machine, I'll just have a little look to see what's making that blue spike. And without very deliberately, constantly looking at the database, if you've just got this image in front of you, and this easy way of jumping from an image of spiking activity to interesting SQL statements, the frequency with which you spot and either preempt or reduce problems which are sort of background noise, background interference, background resource wastage, the frequency with which you can do that goes up dramatically, and the sort of global benefit to your resource limitations drops. I mean, the global benefit you get it just goes up and up, and you find you can just keep improving the system because you're in a position where you can just happen to notice anytime you sit back and look up.
Right. Yeah, I mean you can get similar functionality of SQL Server with the execution plans and whatnot, but it's definitely a little more labor than what you've just walked through. I mean, and also you're going to have to really have quite a bit more understanding about how queries work. Although even looking at this execution plan, I suspect you'd have to, you've got to have some training before you look at this and know what to do about that hash join.
Yeah. Yeah, oh yeah, I mean, it's the usual sort of three-part thing of SQL. You have to be able to understand what the plan means is the very first thing. Then you have to be able to figure out, as the complicated bit with these diagrams, what the blue bars and the green bars and all the rest of it are actually telling you.
Right.
And actually reading those bars for just that little bit of plan there, it's not really a trivial operation. You need a bit of practice before you get the hang of it. And then finally, of course, there's the whole thing of, well, okay, I know what it's doing. What's a better way of doing it? Can I imagine an execution plan which is a more efficient execution plan? So it pushes you, and it makes it easy to spot the problem, and it makes it easy to put the finger on exactly where the problem is, but you still have to have the skill to interpret exactly the problem and come up with the solution.
Right. That makes sense. Well, I mean
yeah,
James,
is there anything? Oh, right.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, we're at noon. I mean, I've hit the basics of what I wanted to cover, and so the question is what's next?
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say, is there anything particularly exciting and thrilling like this? I mean, this is I love. This is my bit of I love this bit of Oracle. Is there a sort of equivalent bit which you think is dramatically brilliant beyond all else? Or
well, I mean, I mean, to a degree, I've already covered it. I mean, the extended events is just head and shoulders so far beyond anything we had prior to it. I mean, and we've had it for years now, and almost no one is using them. So, I mean, I've become an evangelist for extended events, just because they're so powerful. There's so much that can be done with it, and it extends your knowledge so deeply into the system, so you can completely understand exactly what's occurring, when, how, why, and nobody's using this tool, so it's just incredibly painful. But that's okay. I'm helping one of the best people on it is Jonathan Caheas, and he's writing a book, and I'm helping tech edit. So we're going to get the word out. People are going to start using this stuff.
Mm-hmm. Right.
No,
so
someone said the extended events are only for 2012. No, they are. Extended events started in SQL Server 2008. The GUI is only in 2012, but the extended events are there, available in 2008. It's a T-SQL command to get them going. It's nice and simple. I strongly recommend learning it and putting it to work.
Mm-hmm. I've got a question here, which is, what is the overhead in running SQL monitoring? Right, which is always an interesting one to answer. And SQL monitoring switches on for parallel queries, which tend to be big, and it switches on for anything which is predicted to run for more than 6 seconds. So I think the answer is, you might not like actually how much extra work it does, but it'll probably be a very small amount of extra work in general compared to the actual query that Oracle is actually having to run. So it happens automatically, it's built in, technically it's not an overhead, it just happens, right? And it's probably almost always worth it. James, I think you were about to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to say I was just looking at the time, and it's been a fascinating listening to you as always, and I wondered before we wrap things up whether it might be a good idea just to both of you just to summarize a couple of the key points, or maybe just things that if the audience can forget everything, what should they not forget? A couple of points that. Grant, I understand you probably want people to look out. Go and find out about extended events. But yeah, in terms of just a couple of points that everybody should take away from today's discussion.
Okay, well, I mean, I'll just real quick and easy. When you are tuning queries, when you are tuning your servers, when you are trying to worry about performance, please go from the basis of knowledge. Find out what's running slow, find out why it's running slow, and then it will tell you what to do to fix it. Don't just throw indexes at the problem, or, oh, we need another disk, or we need more CPUs. Just go at it from a basis of knowledge. Understanding will lead you down the path better. And then as far as tools go, yeah, extended events and DMOs are the best things that you can understand and know. Jonathan?
Well, I think I get slightly split because the best things are not free, and that's basically the ability to look at the top activity graph and the SQL monitoring stuff. So have a look at what those can do for you, but the licensing for those things is expensive. Having said that, the information that you need to do something very similar, there is other information which is free. We've got the dynamic performance views which tell us what sessions are doing, what SQL statements are doing, what the execution plans are. There's even a view which is, if you like, the final step, the final moment of this SQL monitoring, the $SQL plan statistics all. So if you need, you can actually see exactly what a statement has done. And so I'd say, like Grant, if you're trying to solve a problem, the information you need to solve it is there. Go and see how much work has been done. Go and see where you have lost time, the events. Go and check what the execution plan has done and the statistics of that execution plan so that you can decide what has gone wrong. Right? And if you've got the expensive licenses, it's really 3 or 4 clicks which show you exactly what you want to look at and present it in the best possible way to help you read it and understand it as easily as possible. But even without the expensive licenses, the information is there in the dynamic performance views.
Great. Thank you. I think that's a really nice way to sum the session up. Thank you, everybody, for your questions. I hope that Jonathan and Grant were able to cover most and the main points that you were trying to raise and throughout their discussion. As I mentioned before, I will be putting this video up at the Redgate website, but also on allthingsoracle.com. In fact, it'll actually be on YouTube as well. So there's plenty of options there for you to add further comments and ask questions. Of course, on the screen now, you've got Jonathan, Grant and myself. You've got our contact details. Please feel free to get in touch with any questions or any comments about today's discussion. But I really do hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. As I mentioned at the beginning of today's session, if you work with Oracle and you're interested in database source control and how to make that easier, please do hang around and we'll do a quick demonstration of Redgate's new source control for Oracle tool. But before I go on to that, again, I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. And of course, I'd like to thank Jonathan and Grant for taking the time to discuss. And as always, it's been great. And I sometimes think that these sessions are more enjoyable than the webinars I do more regularly. So thank you once again, Jonathan and Grant.
Oh, thank you, Jonathan. Thanks, James.
Yep.
So again, if you work with Oracle and you're having difficulties with source controlling your database code, please do stay on the line. I'll be looking at this new tool now. Give me a couple of minutes just to get my environment set up. Okay, well, thank you so much for hanging around. I will try and go through this as quickly as I can. I'll provide links as well where you can find out more information. But the aim of this really is to give you a quick overview of Redgate's new source control for Oracle tool. I'm going to be doing a demonstration of it. I'm going to actually show you the main functions and features. What I wanted to do before I dive straight in was just to give a little bit of an overview of what you're going to see today. It is a really easy tool to use. I mean, the concept itself, again, is quite an easy one to get, but it's one of those situations which is quite difficult for most database teams, development teams, and for the DBAs. The actual idea of turning database objects into files, which obviously they need to be files to be put into source control, is in itself quite tricky. But of course, that's just one side of the story. There is the other side where you need to be able to see who has made changes and what those particular changes are, and have some kind of tracking mechanism around that. So source control for Oracle aims to solve that by letting you work in the way that you normally would work, to carry on working in your SQL editor, whether it's SQL Developer or Toad or Pure SQL Developer, whichever editor you're using. As you're making changes to the database, it's going to be looking at the source control repository and the database, and if anything's out of sync, it's going to notify you that there are differences, and then it's going to prompt you to check these changes into source control. As you'll see through this demonstration, the actual process of checking those changes in is really easy, and it's really quick, and really it's taken away all of the difficulty. It's a piece of software, of course, and the aim of software is to make tasks like this easy and transparent. So the first thing that we're going to be looking at is actually, I'm going to simulate making some changes to the database, and then we're going to see how source control for Oracle picks those up and how we can use the tool to check those into source control. Okay, so you should be able to see my desktop here, and the screen we're actually looking at is the interface for source control for Oracle. Behind that, I've got SQL Developer open. I wanted to bring this screen up first because one thing that we need to sort of introduce at the moment is this idea of a project, and I've got one project here, a source control project, and essentially all that is it's showing a link between my database and my source control repository. I'm using Subversion, and currently, source control for Oracle supports Subversion and Team Foundation Server or TFS, so SVN and TFS. And what we're looking at here is we've got my database called Obstacle. I've got a schema here called Widget James, and I've got a repository here. I've actually called the folder in repository Widget, and everything's up to date. So that means that both my database and my repository are in sync. So I've got a couple of scripts here that I'm going to run. So I've just switched to SQL Developer, and I'm going to run this script, which is going to simulate a number of changes that I'm making to this particular database. So that will just run through there. Okay, so it may be bit quick for you to see it, but what you should be able to see now at the bottom of the screen is the source control for Oracle icon has got a little red dot on it. So source control for Oracle has picked up that changes have been made to the database. So there's new changes, but of course we've just made those changes in SQL Developer. We haven't had time to check those changes into source control yet. So it's telling us that the database and the source control repository are out of sync. So I can right click on this, and this is known as a jump menu. It's certainly a term that was new to me until this project, but it's something that we've taken advantage of because it enables you to really quickly see which projects have new changes and to click on this and go straight into that project. So the script that I just ran in SQL Developer made these 5 edits. So it created a table, a trigger, a sequence, and it edited a table, and it edited a package. So if I click on this second one here, at the bottom of the screen, under these objects, we can see a side-by-side difference view of the database and source control. So this is great. So this is the kind of visibility that you're just not able to get without a tool like this. So we've made the changes. We can now look at what we've actually done. So this particular edit here, we can clearly see that what we've done is we've added a new column. So we've added a column called discount. That's the database. That column is not yet in the object that's in source control. Made a little change to this package here. And we've created some new objects. Of course, there's nothing in source control yet. These are brand new objects, so it's just showing the blank that this is this is going to be a new one. They're all ticked by default. If I uncheck those, I can tick individual objects. What you're seeing, this little notice that's popped up here, is that some of the selected objects, they reference other objects. So it's picking up on dependencies between objects as well. So it has a level of intelligence there. We could just click on this button here to select all of the reference objects, but for this demonstration, I'm going to check them all in. The message I've just typed there is obviously I'm just typing something very quickly, but it's important to type this accurate because this is actually going to go. This is going to go with the check-in, with the objects as they're checked in, and this will be within the log. So again, we're making it really easy for you to keep track of what these particular changes are. So I reviewed all the objects. I've entered in my log message, and I'm simply going to click on this check-in button here. And all of the objects have now been checked into source control. So I hope you agree that was really easy and also really fast. Obviously, we're all up to date. We've got this next tab here, which is the history tab. So what we can do, we can actually go back and look through the changes that we've just checked in. We can go through the whole history. So this is the last one we've just done. So we've got a message here, checking objects. Once again, we can use the side-by-side view to see what those changes actually were. And if, for example, I look at this particular package, I can see here that this looks a bit odd. It's I've just added a -1 and a +1. Essentially, I haven't actually changed anything. So if something was to go wrong with the application, you can very quickly see which change it was using this side-by-side diff view, and obviously you could then go and rectify any issues. We're providing a nice bit of information here. This information is taken from SVN. Remember at the beginning I said I'm using SVN, but it's taken this information. So it's got the revision number, the date, and the user. Obviously this is me, but if I scroll down, a couple of my colleagues in the team are also checking changes in. We're working within a shared environment, so we're making changes to the same set of schemas on the same database. And we can see here that one of my colleagues, Michael Christofides, has made some changes here, and obviously I can review his changes as well as my own changes. So this will give you coverage and give you a bit of visibility over your team as they're making changes. Just going to run another script here. Okay, so it's just updated. I just wanted to run this script because if you remember before I said it looked like there's a bit of a mistake in that particular package. So I found that in the history, or maybe I actually found that because the application didn't work properly. I've gone into source control for Oracle. I've had a little look at the last change that was checked into Subversion, and I've changed that, I've rectified that, and again I can just check in these objects. So very quick, very simple. I hope you agree with that. So the example I was just illustrating there was I'm part of a team. We're all working on the same schema. We're all working on the same set of schemas, and we're working on the same database in a shared environment. Source control for Oracle also helps you to, or if you're looking to move to a more distributed development environment, or maybe you already work in a distributed development environment, which could be that each of the developers has their own private schema on the same database, or maybe they actually have their own development environment, a local copy of the database. Source control for Oracle enables you to firstly move to this kind of setup, but supports you in a slightly different way if you are already working in this way. And I just want to quickly show those features now, and also whilst doing that, just show you how easy it is to get set up with source control for Oracle in the first place. So I'm actually going to go right back to the beginning here. And I'm going to create a new source control for Oracle project. This is an area of the tool that we've worked really hard to make it easy for you to get connected, to connect your database to your source control repository and get up and running with this tool and start source controlling your database code. So we've got a very quick 5-step wizard here. So I'm just going to connect to the same database, but this time I'm going to pretend that I am Michael. Fortunately, he's let me. He's told me what his password is, so I can connect as Michael. Just need to do a little bit of copy and pasting here because this will make it quicker. As you can see, at every stage, as I'm entering details to connect to the database, as I'm entering details to connect to the repository, I can test those before I go on. Again, I'm going to be connecting to Subversion. We've got a tab here for Team Foundation Server. I don't have the client installed, so I'm not using Team Foundation Server, but I am using Subversion. So the next thing I want to do is find the schema that I want to map to the source control repository. We're going to use the exact same folder that we were using before. So this is the widget folder. I could create a new folder here if I wanted to. So now we've got a summary here. I'm just going to keep this project known as Widget Michael, just so that we can separate them in the project view. Okay, so what's happening here? We've seen something that's a bit different to what we saw before. Before, we said we had objects to check in. This time it's saying there are changes to get. I just want to go back into SQL Developer because there's something really cool here. And the schema that I've linked to is actually totally empty. So it's this schema here. So there's no tables, there's no views, there's no indexes or packages. Of course, if there were objects in there, it would work in a very similar way. It's going to be comparing the database to the source control repository. But what I want to use this part of the demonstration to illustrate is source control for Oracle is going to enable you to set up a distributed development environment. Or if you're already working in that way, it's going to help you get new users up and running with the latest copy of the database. The important thing is here, we're going to populate this schema with the objects from source control. And we hope if everybody has been following best practice of checking their changes into source control as they're making them, then the copy of the schema that we're going to create now, or we're going to populate these objects, is going to be the latest version. Okay, so again, all of those are empty. We're just going to click on this one here, and we've got all of the objects. So these are some of the things that I've just checked in, that I've edited. Importantly, it's comparing Michael's schema with the source control repository. I'll click on this button here. I'm going to apply all those changes. Once again, I can review those changes. If I'd already had some objects in this schema, you'd be able to see the side-by-side diff in exactly the same way that we saw it in the check-in and the same way that we saw it in the history tab. Click on this button and it's going to apply those changes. Let's go back into SQL Developer. Let's just refresh. And we should see all of these objects have now populated this particular schema. So again, I hope you see that was really easy to do. And importantly, we've got this new user up and running with the latest copy of the schema from source control. So just to recap, source control for Oracle enables easy database source control currently with SVN and TFS. Avoids the human errors and removes manual process to source controlling database code. And it enables your team and yourself to carry on using whichever SQL editor you want to use. This is really important for teams that are using a mixture of different IDEs. So whether you're using SQL Developer, Toad, Pure SQL Developer, then you'll be able to use source control for Oracle to help you get your database changes into source control. It also helps you set up dedicated environments and work with dedicated environments much more easily. It's an integral part of the deployment suite for Oracle, and so alongside source control for Oracle, we have a tool called Schema Compare for Oracle, which helps you compare environments and deploy changes through development and test QA live, and also Data Compare for Oracle, which does the same but for table data. So this is a tool that is looking at the table data within your schemas, and they will use it to actually diff data and table data between environments. So you can download a 28-day trial of source control for Oracle at redgate.com/source control for Oracle, or visit redgate.com/Oracle, where you'll be able to find out about the deployment suite and all of the tools that make up that product, including source control for Oracle. So I would recommend go to the web page, download a trial, take a look at the product, see if it's something that can help you out, and we will support you throughout your evaluation and help you get up and running with this new product. I hope that was that gave you a good insight into source control for Oracle. Please do put any questions to me. I'll be really happy to go over any part of the product again if you'd like me to. Okay, we've got one question that has just come in. Again, please do use this opportunity to ask me some questions, and it's regarding support for Git. We've had a lot of requests for Git and for Mercurial support. If I actually just bring up our web page. So if you go to the source control for Oracle page, let's scroll down to the bottom here. We've got a link here to our user voice page, and I've just brought it up here. You can see that actually our biggest request is source control for Git. So we're using this forum here, this user voice forum, to gain feedback on the product and to help us look at the features that you really need, the features that you really want, and we're going to be basing decisions on the requests, the ideas and questions that we get here. But there's a huge amount here, so please do check this out. Vote up ones that you're interested in and add your own. Once again, if you go to the source control page, redgate.com/Oracle, go to Redgate, navigate through our products menu. You will find it. It's really easy, and you can suggest new features here. Just a question in here about, can you exclude specific objects from a schema? Filtering is something that we are actually looking at for not just for source control for Oracle, but also for our schema for Oracle tool as well. So currently it will be looking at all of the objects in the schema, but we do hope to add filtering, or certainly is something that we are getting some feedback from, and hopefully we get more feedback on that particular feature. Please do try the product for yourself, see how it works with your environment, and give us some feedback by going to our user voice page. Okay, so no other questions at this stage. As I mentioned before, though, we do provide full support during any evaluation of our tools. So if anything comes to you as you're checking the product out, please do use the support links within the product, also on our website. If you have any more questions, we'll be really happy to answer those. So once again, I'd like to thank you for joining me for the main presentation. I'd also like to thank you for hanging around and taking a look at source control for Oracle. I hope you found this demonstration useful and interesting, and I do hope it's something that you will consider using. Thank you once again, and I look forward to speaking with you on our next Oracle or our Oracle and SQL Server webinar. Thank you very much, and hope you have a nice day or a nice evening, depending on where you are.